The morning sun cast long shadows across the Coronado Beach training grounds as Sarah Martinez stepped off the transport bus with 23 other recruits. The salty Pacific breeze whipped through her short brown hair as she shouldered her duffel bag and took her first real look at the place that would either make or break her dreams. Naval Special Warfare Training Command loomed before them like a fortress of steel and concrete, its buildings weathered by decades of pushing human limits. Sarah had dreamed of this moment since she was 12 years old, watching documentaries about elite military units with her grandfather, a Korean War veteran who had filled her childhood with stories of courage and sacrifice. Now, at 24, she stood among the hopefuls who dared to attempt what less than 20% would complete. The statistics didn't scare her. Nothing had scared her since the day she pulled her little brother from their burning apartment building when she was 16. The other recruits were exactly what she had expected. Most stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed to stretch the seams of their uniforms. Their faces carried the confidence of men who had never been told they couldn't do something because of their gender. Sarah, at 5 feet 6 inches and 140 pounds, looked like she had wandered into the wrong group. She could already see the sideways glances and hear the whispered comments. "Did someone's girlfriend get lost?" muttered a massive recruit with arms like tree trunks. His name tape read Morrison, and his smirk suggested he found the situation highly amusing. Several others chuckled, their voices carrying across the formation like ripples in a pond. Sarah kept her eyes forward, her jaw set in a line that her grandfather would have recognized. She had heard variations of this comment her entire life. In high school football, where she had been the only girl on the team. In the Marines, where she had earned her reconnaissance specialist rating despite being told she belonged in administration. In college, where professors had questioned whether she really understood the material she was mastering. The comments had stopped bothering her years ago. A sharp whistle cut through the morning air like a blade. 3 instructors emerged from the main building, their desert camouflage uniforms bearing the distinctive Budweiser pin that marked them as SEALs. They moved with the fluid precision of predators, their eyes scanning the formation with the intensity of men who had seen combat in places most people couldn't pronounce. The lead instructor was a lean man in his early 40s with graying temples and scars that spoke of operations conducted in darkness. His name tape read Chief Randall, and when he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Welcome to the most miserable 6 months of your pathetic lives," he announced, his words echoing off the surrounding buildings. "Some of you think you're here because you're tough. Some think you're here because you're smart. All of you are wrong. You're here because 23 weeks from now, we need warriors who can operate in conditions that would kill normal people. Most of you will quit before we find out if you have what it takes." His gaze swept across the formation, lingering on each face long enough to make its owner uncomfortable. When his eyes reached Sarah, she felt the weight of his evaluation like a physical thing. She met his stare without flinching, her breathing steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "The ocean doesn't care about your gender," Chief Randall continued. "Bullets don't care about your politics. The enemy doesn't care about your feelings. The only thing that matters in my world is whether you can complete the mission and bring your teammates home alive. Everything else is noise." The second instructor, a stocky man with shoulders like a linebacker, stepped forward. "Drop your gear and assume the position," he barked. "We're starting with a little baseline assessment. 200 push-ups, and the last 5 to finish get to do them again." Sarah dropped her bag and moved into position alongside the others. The concrete was still cool from the night, and she could taste salt in the air as she lowered herself into the first repetition. Around her, grunts and heavy breathing filled the space as the group began what would be the first of thousands of push-ups they would perform together. By the 50th repetition, the larger recruit's advantage was already showing. Their longer arms and greater muscle mass allowed them to maintain form while Sarah felt the burn beginning in her shoulders. By the 100th, 3 recruits had already dropped out, their faces red with embarrassment as instructors circled them like sharks. Sarah's arms trembled as she pushed through the 120th repetition. The concrete scraped against her knuckles, and sweat dripped steadily from her forehead. She could hear Morrison beside her, his breathing still controlled, his form perfect. The whispered comments from earlier seemed to hang in the air like a challenge. At 150, Sarah's form began to break down. Her back sagged slightly, and her breathing became ragged. An instructor appeared beside her, his boots filling her peripheral vision. "Having trouble, recruit?" The voice belonged to the stocky instructor whose name tape read, Petty Officer Hayes. His tone carried amusement rather than encouragement. Sarah gritted her teeth and forced her body back into proper alignment. "No, Petty Officer," she managed between breaths. "Really? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're about to become one of our early departures. Save us all some time and quit now before you embarrass yourself further." The words hit her like ice water. Sarah thought of her grandfather, who had carried wounded Marines across frozen Korean hills. She thought of her little brother, who still wore the scars from the fire she had saved him from. She thought of every person who had ever told her she wasn't strong enough, fast enough, or tough enough to belong. Sarah drove through the remaining 50 repetitions with a fury that surprised even her. When Chief Randall finally called time, she collapsed onto her forearms, her entire body shaking with exhaustion. Around her, other recruits lay gasping on the concrete like beached fish. "Not bad," Chief Randall announced as he walked among them. "Only lost 5 on the first exercise. That might be a record." His voice carried no warmth, but Sarah detected something that might have been approval. "On your feet. We're going for a little run." The little run turned out to be a 5-mile course that wound through the soft sand of Coronado Beach. Sarah had always been a strong runner, and within the first mile, she had moved from the back of the pack to somewhere near the middle. The sand grabbed at their boots with every step, turning what should have been a moderate pace into a grinding endurance test. Morrison, despite his size, proved to be a capable runner. He maintained his position near the front of the pack, occasionally glancing back at Sarah with what appeared to be surprise. Several other recruits had already fallen behind, their heavy breathing audible even over the sound of boots hitting sand. By the 3rd mile, Sarah had moved into the front third of the group. Her lungs burned with the salt air, but her legs felt strong beneath her. She had spent years running the hills around her hometown in Colorado, often with a weighted pack, preparing for this moment. The months of preparation were paying off. "Look at Martinez go," she heard one recruit say to another. The comment wasn't mocking this time. It carried a note of respect that she hadn't heard from her fellow trainees before. The final 2 miles became a test of will more than fitness. The sun had climbed higher, and the sand reflected heat like a mirror. Sarah's uniform was soaked with sweat, and salt stung her eyes, but she maintained her pace. Around her, the group had strung out into a long line, with the strongest runners pulling ahead and the weakest falling further behind. When they finally returned to the training compound, Sarah was among the first 10 to cross the finish line. She bent over with her hands on her knees, trying to catch her breath while fighting the urge to vomit. The combination of exhaustion and heat had left her feeling dizzy, but she remained on her feet. Chief Randall stood at the finish line with a stopwatch, noting times as each recruit staggered across. When the last trainee finally appeared, nearly 10 minutes behind the leaders, the instructor's expression remained neutral. "Better," he announced to the group. "Some of you might actually have a chance." His eyes swept across the formation again, this time lingering on Sarah for a moment longer than the others. "Chow Hall opens in 30 minutes. After that, we'll see how well you swim." The swimming assessment proved to be Sarah's strongest event. Years of competitive swimming in high school had left her with technique that more than compensated for any physical disadvantages. She moved through the water with an efficiency that surprised her instructors and fellow recruits alike. The 500-meter swim test required participants to complete the distance in under 20 minutes while wearing boots and camouflage utilities. Sarah finished in just under 15 minutes, her stroke rhythm barely changing throughout the entire distance. She pulled herself from the pool, feeling strong while several of the larger recruits struggled to complete the course within the time limit. "Where did you learn to swim like that?" Morrison asked as they gathered their gear after the assessment. For the first time, his voice carried curiosity rather than derision. "High school team," Sarah replied simply. She wasn't interested in making friends, especially with someone who had spent the morning questioning her right to be there. "Swam 4 years, made state championships twice." Morrison nodded slowly, processing this information. Around them, other recruits were beginning to look at Sarah with something approaching respect. The girl who had seemed so out of place that morning was proving to be more capable than her appearance suggested. The afternoon brought weapons familiarization and basic tactical movement exercises. Sarah's experience in the Marines showed clearly as she handled the M4 carbine with practiced ease. Her movements were smooth and confident, and her shooting groups were consistently tight. The instructors watched her performance with increasing interest. As evening approached and the recruits prepared for their first night in the barracks, Sarah reflected on the day's events. She had survived the initial physical assessments and proven that she belonged among the group. But she knew that the real challenges were still ahead. Hell Week was months away, but already she could feel the weight of expectations settling on her shoulders. The barracks were spartanly furnished with simple metal bunks and small lockers for personal gear. Sarah chose a bunk in the corner, preferring to have her back to a wall rather than be surrounded on all sides. As she unpacked her few personal belongings, she became aware that several of her fellow recruits were watching her with renewed interest. "Martinez," called a recruit whose name tape read Thompson. He was a tall, lean man with the patient eyes of someone accustomed to thinking before speaking. "What made you want to try out for this program?" Sarah paused in her unpacking, considering how much to share. The truth was complicated, involving family history, personal drive, and a desire to prove something that she wasn't entirely sure she understood herself. "Same reason as everyone else, I imagine," she said finally. "Wanted to see if I could do it." Thompson nodded as if this explanation made perfect sense. Around them, other conversations were beginning as the recruits settled into their new reality. Sarah listened to the various backgrounds represented in their group: college athletes, former Marines like herself, Army Rangers, and even a few civilians who had somehow managed to meet the stringent prerequisites. The lights-out call came at 2100 hours, plunging the barracks into darkness. Sarah lay on her narrow bunk, listening to the sounds of 23 other people trying to fall asleep in an unfamiliar place. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and she needed to be ready for whatever the instructors decided to throw at them. But sleep didn't come easily. Her mind kept replaying the events of the day, analyzing each interaction and moment for clues about what lay ahead. She thought about the look in Chief Randall's eyes during the run and the way Morrison's attitude had shifted after the swimming assessment. Most of all, she thought about the tattoo on her left shoulder blade, hidden beneath her uniform shirt. The tattoo was small and simple, a trident crossed with an anchor, surrounded by a circle of 13 stars. Most people who saw it assumed it was just military-themed artwork, common among service members, but Sarah knew its true significance, and she had spent years hoping she would never have to explain what it really meant. Tomorrow would bring new tests, new challenges, and new opportunities to prove herself worthy of the program that had claimed so many before her. 3 weeks into training, Sarah had established herself as one of the more competent recruits in the class. The initial physical assessments had been followed by increasingly difficult challenges designed to test not just strength and endurance, but mental resilience and team cohesion. She had performed well in most areas, but the social dynamics of the group remained complicated. The morning began like all others with a 4:30 wake-up call and immediate physical training. Today's evolution was surf torture, one of the more dreaded aspects of SEAL training, where recruits would lie in the freezing Pacific surf while instructors tested their ability to endure discomfort without complaint. The October water temperature hovered around 60 degrees, cold enough to cause hypothermia in unprotected individuals. Sarah stood with her class in formation on the beach, watching the gray waves crash against the shore in the pre-dawn darkness. The instructors had arranged themselves along the waterline like sentinels, their faces barely visible in the dim light. Chief Randall stood slightly apart from the others, his attention focused on a clipboard that contained performance evaluations for each recruit. "Today we find out who really wants to be here," announced Petty Officer Hayes, his voice carrying easily over the sound of the surf. "Surf torture is about more than just being cold and wet. It's about maintaining focus and discipline when your body is screaming at you to quit. Some of you will discover that you're not as tough as you thought." The recruits moved toward the water in formation, their boots splashing through the shallow waves before they settled into position, lying on their backs in the surf zone. The first wave that rolled over them felt like ice water injected directly into their veins. Sarah gasped involuntarily as the cold penetrated her uniform and shocked her nervous system. Within minutes, the cold had moved beyond discomfort into genuine pain. The waves rolled over them in steady intervals, each one carrying away a little more of their body heat. Sarah focused on controlling her breathing and maintaining mental discipline, techniques her grandfather had taught her during their hunting trips in the Colorado mountains. Beside her, Morrison was struggling more than she had expected. His larger frame, which had been an advantage in most physical exercises, seemed to be working against him in the cold water. His breathing was ragged, and she could see him shivering violently between waves. "Martinez!" called Chief Randall from his position on the beach. "What's the water temperature?" Sarah had to work to keep her voice steady as another wave crashed over them. "Feels like paradise, Chief," she called back, using the standard response that indicated mental toughness, despite physical discomfort. "Outstanding. Morrison, how about you?" Morrison's response was barely audible and clearly indicated he was struggling with the cold. Sarah could see the instructors making notes on their clipboards, documenting which recruits were handling the stress well and which were beginning to crack. After 20 minutes that felt like hours, the instructors called them out of the water. The recruits stumbled up the beach, their movements clumsy from hypothermia and exhaustion. Several appeared to be in the early stages of shock, their faces pale and their responses sluggish. "Hit the showers and get into dry uniforms," Chief Randall ordered. "You have 15 minutes before the next evolution." The hot water in the shower felt like salvation as sensation slowly returned to Sarah's extremities. Around her, other recruits were recovering at different rates. Some seemed relatively unaffected by the experience, while others were still shivering violently despite the warm water. "How do you do it?" Morrison asked as they dried off and changed into fresh uniforms. His voice carried genuine curiosity rather than the earlier skepticism. Sarah considered the question as she pulled on her boots. "My grandfather used to take me hunting in the mountains during winter," she explained. "Taught me that your mind controls how your body responds to discomfort. The cold is just information. You can choose how to process that information." Morrison nodded thoughtfully. Over the past few weeks, he had become less hostile and more genuinely interested in understanding how Sarah was managing to keep pace with recruits who significantly outweighed her. The transformation in his attitude reflected a broader change in how the class viewed her capabilities. The next evolution was small unit tactics in the urban warfare training facility. The recruits were divided into four-person teams and assigned missions that required them to work together under pressure. Sarah found herself teamed with Morrison, Thompson, and a quiet recruit named Jackson, who rarely spoke but consistently performed well in individual challenges. Their mission was to clear a mock building that supposedly contained enemy personnel while recovering a package from the third floor. The scenario was designed to test communication, tactical decision-making, and the ability to maintain unit cohesion under stress. Hidden cameras would record their performance for later review by the instructors. Sarah naturally assumed the role of point woman as they approached the building. Her Marine Corps experience in urban combat training gave her confidence in building clearing procedures, and the others seemed willing to follow her lead. They moved through the first floor methodically, communicating in whispers and hand signals as they checked each room. The second floor proved more challenging as they encountered their first simulated enemy contact. Paint-marking rounds filled the air as they engaged targets that appeared suddenly from concealed positions. Sarah's team moved with increasing confidence, their earlier training beginning to show as they covered each other's movements and communicated effectively under pressure. As they reached the third floor, Sarah noticed something that made her pause. A series of photographs on the wall showed various SEAL teams throughout history, their faces blackened with camouflage paint as they posed in exotic locations around the world. One photograph in particular caught her attention, showing a team from the 1990s during what appeared to be a mission in Eastern Europe. The delay was momentary, but Morrison noticed her hesitation. "Martinez, what is it?" he whispered. Sarah forced herself to focus on the mission. "Nothing. Let's finish this." They completed the exercise successfully, recovering the package and escaping the building within the allocated time frame. That evening, as the recruits gathered for chow in the mess hall, Sarah found herself thinking about the photograph she had seen during the exercise. The face in the center of the group had looked familiar in a way that made her uncomfortable. She tried to push the thought aside and focus on the conversation happening around her. "Tomorrow we start dive training," Thompson was saying to the group at their table. "I hear that's where they really start separating the wheat from the chaff." "I'm not worried about the diving," Morrison replied. "It's the underwater navigation that concerns me. Being disoriented 50 feet down is not my idea of fun." Sarah listened to the conversation while picking at her food. The physical challenges of SEAL training didn't worry her as much as some of the other recruits. Her real concern was about maintaining her privacy regarding certain aspects of her background. The tattoo on her shoulder blade felt like it was burning, even though she knew that was impossible. After dinner, the recruits had a brief period of free time before lights out. Sarah used this time to write in a journal she kept hidden in her locker, documenting her experiences and thoughts about the training process. Writing helped her process the stress and maintain perspective during the more difficult moments. "Martinez, got a minute?" Chief Randall's voice interrupted her writing. She looked up to see the senior instructor standing at the entrance to the barracks area. His expression was neutral, but something in his tone suggested this wasn't a casual conversation. "Of course, Chief," Sarah replied, closing her journal and following him outside. They walked in silence to a small office building adjacent to the main training facility. Chief Randall's office was spartanly furnished with a metal desk, 2 chairs, and walls covered with photographs and certificates from his 20-year career in the teams. A large map of the world was marked with pins indicating various deployments and operations. "Sit down," Chief Randall said, settling behind his desk with a manila folder that Sarah recognized as her personnel file. "I've been watching your performance over the past few weeks. Your physical scores are solid. Your tactical knowledge is above average for someone with your background, and your mental toughness appears to be genuine." Sarah waited for the other shoe to drop. Conversations like this rarely ended with simple praise. "However," Chief Randall continued, "there are some aspects of your background that raise questions. Your service record shows a gap of several months between completing reconnaissance training and reporting to your first duty assignment. During that time, you were involved in some kind of classified program that's been redacted from your file. The room felt suddenly smaller as Sarah realized where this conversation was heading. She had hoped that particular chapter of her life would remain buried in classified files, but apparently, Chief Randall had access to information that most people didn't. "I can't discuss that program, Chief," Sarah said carefully. "The classification level is above my clearance to share." Chief Randall leaned back in his chair, studying her face with the intensity of someone accustomed to reading people's motivations and capabilities. "The thing is, Martinez, I think I might know what program you're talking about. There have been rumors for years about certain experimental training initiatives involving female candidates for special operations roles." Sarah's heart rate increased, but she maintained steady eye contact with the instructor. Years of operational security training had taught her how to manage her responses under pressure, but this felt different. This felt personal in a way that tactical interrogation never had. "If you're asking me to confirm or deny involvement in classified programs—" "Chief, you know I can't do that," she replied. Chief Randall nodded slowly. "I respect that, Martinez, but I need you to understand something. This program has a zero-tolerance policy for any kind of deception or hidden agendas. If there's something in your background that could compromise your effectiveness or the safety of your teammates, I need to know about it now." Sarah considered her options carefully. She could continue to maintain operational security and hope that her past remained buried. Or she could trust Chief Randall with information that could either end her career or explain why she was better prepared for this program than her file suggested. "What I can tell you, Chief, is that everything in my official record is accurate. I've never been involved in anything that would compromise my loyalty to this country or my ability to serve effectively in any unit." Chief Randall studied her for a long moment before closing the file. "Fair enough, Martinez, but understand that if I discover you've been less than honest with me, your time here will end immediately. This program is built on trust, and trust has to be earned every single day." Sarah nodded her understanding and waited to be dismissed. As she walked back to the barracks, her mind raced with implications of the conversation. Chief Randall clearly suspected something about her background, but she wasn't sure how much he actually knew versus how much he was fishing for information. Back in the barracks, her fellow recruits were engaged in the usual evening activities: equipment maintenance, letter writing, and quiet conversations about the day's training. Sarah returned to her bunk and retrieved her journal, but found herself unable to concentrate on writing. The photograph from the urban warfare exercise kept returning to her thoughts. She had recognized one of the faces in that SEAL team picture, and the recognition brought with it a flood of memories she had spent years trying to suppress. If she was right about what she had seen, her carefully constructed privacy was about to become much more complicated. Later that night, as the barracks settled into the quiet routine of lights out, Sarah lay awake staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new tests of her ability to maintain her secret while proving herself worthy of the program. But tonight, she couldn't shake the feeling that her past was about to catch up with her in ways she hadn't anticipated. The tattoo on her shoulder blade seemed to pulse with significance in the darkness. 13 stars arranged in a circle around a trident and anchor. To most observers, it looked like military-themed artwork, but Sarah knew it represented something far more specific. A commemorative design created for graduates of a program that officially didn't exist, honoring 13 fallen operators whose names appeared on no public memorials. She had earned the right to wear that tattoo through 6 months of training that made current SEAL qualification look moderate by comparison. But the program had been shut down amid political controversy, its record sealed, and its participants scattered to conventional units with instructions to never discuss their experiences. Now, lying in a SEAL training barracks, Sarah wondered if the past she had tried so hard to leave behind was about to become the key to her future. Hell Week arrived like a storm that everyone could see coming, but no one could fully prepare for. After 12 weeks of progressive training that had already eliminated nearly half the original class, the surviving recruits faced the ultimate test of their determination and resilience. For 5 days and nights, they would be pushed to the absolute limits of human endurance, with minimal sleep, constant physical challenges, and psychological pressure designed to break all but the most committed. Sarah stood with the 11 remaining members of her class in the pre-dawn darkness of Monday morning, waiting for the air horn that would signal the beginning of their ordeal. The past 3 months had transformed the group from strangers into a tight-knit unit that had learned to function as a team despite their diverse backgrounds and personalities. Morrison had become one of Sarah's strongest supporters, his initial skepticism replaced by genuine respect for her capabilities. Thompson remained the steady, thoughtful presence he had always been, while Jackson had emerged as a natural leader despite his quiet demeanor. The dynamics of the group had evolved in ways that none of them had anticipated during those first difficult days. Chief Randall stood before them with a megaphone, his face barely visible in the gray light. Behind him, a full crew of instructors waited with equipment and scenarios designed to test every aspect of their training. The obstacle course had been modified to include additional challenges, boats waited at the water's edge, and transport vehicles idled nearby for movements to unknown locations. "Gentlemen and lady," Chief Randall began, his amplified voice carrying across the beach, "for the next 120 hours you will discover who you really are when everything comfortable and familiar is stripped away. Some of you will find strength you didn't know you possessed. Others will find limitations they never acknowledged. All of you will be changed by this experience." The air horn sounded, and Hell Week began with an immediate rush to the boats, waiting in the surf. Sarah's team grabbed their assigned inflatable boat and charged into the waves, their movements coordinated by months of practice. The cold Pacific water soaked through their uniforms instantly, beginning the process of physical discomfort that would be their constant companion for the next 5 days. The first evolution was a long-distance paddle to San Diego Bay, followed by beach reconnaissance exercises that required them to work in pairs while remaining undetected by instructors playing the role of enemy forces. Sarah found herself partnered with Jackson, whose calm demeanor and methodical approach complemented her more aggressive tendencies. They moved through the exercise with practiced efficiency, using hand signals and predetermined routes to complete their objectives while avoiding the roving patrols of instructors. The combination of physical exertion and mental stress was already taking its toll on some of the other teams, but Sarah felt strong and focused. As the hours progressed, the exercises became increasingly complex and demanding. Boat races in heavy surf tested their teamwork and determination. Long-distance runs in soft sand pushed their cardiovascular systems to the limit. Obstacle courses completed while carrying heavy equipment challenged their strength and coordination. By Tuesday evening, exhaustion was becoming a factor for everyone in the class. They had been allowed perhaps 6 hours of sleep total since the beginning of Hell Week, taken in brief intervals between evolutions. Sarah's body ached from constant activity, and her mind felt foggy from fatigue, but she maintained her focus and continued to perform at a high level. The real test came on Wednesday during an evolution called Around the World, where teams had to carry their boats overland for several miles, navigating through different terrain while completing various challenges along the way. Sarah's team was functioning well despite their exhaustion, but she noticed that Morrison was beginning to struggle more than usual. "You okay?" she asked during a brief rest period as they prepared to lift their boat for another segment of the journey. Morrison's face was pale with fatigue, and his hands shook slightly as he adjusted his gear. "Just tired," he replied, but Sarah could see that he was dealing with more than simple exhaustion. "When's the last time you ate anything?" she pressed. Morrison couldn't remember, which explained his deteriorating condition. Sarah shared her remaining energy bar with him and made sure he drank water from his canteen. Taking care of teammates was an essential part of the SEAL ethos, and she wasn't going to let him fail because of something as simple as inadequate nutrition. The gesture didn't go unnoticed by the instructors, who were constantly evaluating how the recruits handled stress and supported each other under pressure. Chief Randall made a note on his clipboard as he watched Sarah help Morrison prepare for the next phase of the exercise. Thursday brought the most challenging evolution yet, a night navigation exercise in the mountains east of San Diego. Teams were given coordinates for multiple checkpoints that they had to reach in sequence while carrying full combat loads and navigating by map and compass in complete darkness. Sarah's navigation skills, honed during her time in the Marines and refined by experiences she couldn't discuss, proved invaluable during this exercise. She guided her team through the rough terrain with confidence, finding each checkpoint with minimal difficulty, while other teams struggled with the challenging conditions. "How do you do this so easily?" Thompson asked as they approached their fourth checkpoint of the night. "I can barely see the compass in this darkness." Sarah paused in her navigation calculations. The truth was that she had spent considerable time training in conditions far more challenging than this, but she couldn't explain that without revealing information about her classified background. "Practice," she said simply. "Lots of practice reading maps and using dead reckoning." What she didn't mention was that her practice had included 6 months of advanced training with some of the most elite operators in the military, learning techniques that weren't taught in conventional programs. The navigation skills she was demonstrating had been earned through experiences that had pushed her far beyond anything she had encountered in regular Marine Corps training. As Friday approached and Hell Week neared its conclusion, only 9 recruits remained from the original class. The combination of physical challenges, sleep deprivation, and psychological pressure had eliminated 2 more candidates who had decided they couldn't continue with the program. The final evolution was a beach reconnaissance mission that required the surviving recruits to work together as a complete unit. They had to infiltrate a simulated enemy position, gather intelligence, and extract without being detected. The exercise was designed to test everything they had learned while operating under extreme fatigue and stress. Sarah found herself naturally assuming a leadership role as they planned their approach to the target area. Her teammates looked to her for guidance, and she realized that the respect she had earned over the past months had positioned her as one of the most trusted members of the group. They moved through the exercise with precision and coordination, their months of training evident in their smooth execution despite their exhaustion. Sarah's tactical knowledge and navigation skills proved crucial in maintaining unit cohesion and completing their objectives within the allocated time frame. As they extracted from the target area and made their way back to the beach where Chief Randall waited with the completion ceremony, Sarah felt a profound sense of accomplishment. She had not only survived Hell Week, but had emerged as one of the strongest performers in her class. Chief Randall stood on the beach as the surviving recruits assembled in formation, their faces showing the toll of 5 days without adequate rest or nutrition. The morning sun cast long shadows across the sand, and the sound of waves provided a peaceful counterpoint to the intensity of the past week. "Congratulations," Chief Randall announced, his voice carrying genuine warmth for the first time since the beginning of training. "You have completed Hell Week and proven that you have the basic mental and physical tools necessary for this program. But understand that this is just the beginning. The real training starts now." As the ceremony continued with the traditional presentation of brown t-shirts marking their completion of Hell Week, Chief Randall's eyes lingered on Sarah with an expression she couldn't quite read. Something in his demeanor suggested that their earlier conversation about her background was still on his mind. After the ceremony, as the recruits prepared for their first real sleep in 5 days, Chief Randall approached Sarah with the same serious expression he had worn during their previous meeting in his office. "Martinez, I need you to come with me," he said quietly, gesturing toward the office building. Sarah followed him through the familiar halls, wondering what new questions he might have about her background. The exhaustion of Hell Week made it difficult to maintain the mental sharpness she needed for these conversations, but she forced herself to focus as they entered his office. Chief Randall closed the door behind them and gestured for her to sit down. This time, however, he remained standing as he moved to the wall covered with photographs from his career. He stopped in front of one particular picture that Sarah recognized with a shock of recognition. It was the same photograph she had noticed during the urban warfare exercise months earlier. Chief Randall stood in the center of the group, his face blackened with camouflage paint, surrounded by other operators whose faces she now realized she recognized from her classified training program. "I think it's time we had an honest conversation, Martinez," Chief Randall said, turning to face her directly. "About where you really learned the skills you've been demonstrating throughout this training." Sarah's heart rate increased as she realized that Chief Randall knew far more about her background than she had suspected. The carefully maintained operational security she had preserved for years was about to be challenged in a way she hadn't anticipated. "I know about Project Nightingale," Chief Randall continued, using a code name that Sarah hadn't heard spoken aloud since the program had been shut down. "I know about the experimental training program that put female candidates through an abbreviated but intensified version of SEAL training. I know because I was one of the instructors." The room seemed to spin as Sarah processed this revelation. Chief Randall hadn't just suspected her background, he had been part of it. The recognition she had felt when seeing his photograph hadn't been coincidence. He had been there during some of the most challenging training she had ever experienced. "That's impossible," Sarah said, though even as she spoke, pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. All the instructors in that program were carefully selected volunteers who agreed to keep the program classified even after it was terminated, Chief Randall finished. "We were told that the participants would be scattered to conventional units and that their training records would be sealed indefinitely." Sarah stared at him as memories from those 6 months flooded back. The intensive training had been conducted at a remote facility in Nevada, far from any regular military installation. The instructors had worn no name tags and had been referred to only by call signs. But now, looking at Chief Randall's face, she could place him among the cadre that had pushed her and 12 other women through training that had broken 8 of them. "You were Instructor 7, she said, the call sign coming back to her from memories she had tried to suppress. Chief Randall nodded slowly. "And you were Candidate 3. You finished second in the final rankings, behind only Candidate 8, who had prior special operations experience with Delta Force." The weight of this revelation settled over Sarah like a heavy blanket. Her carefully maintained secret was no longer secret, at least not from the one person whose opinion mattered most for her current career aspirations. "So what happens now?" she asked, unsure whether this knowledge would help or hurt her chances of completing SEAL training. Chief Randall returned to his seat behind the desk, his expression thoughtful. "Now we acknowledge that you've already proven yourself capable of meeting standards that are arguably higher than what we require here. The question is whether you can set aside what you learned in that program and allow yourself to be trained according to our methods and traditions." Sarah considered this carefully. Project Nightingale had been an experiment in accelerated training that compressed months of instruction into weeks of intense preparation. She had emerged from that program with skills and confidence that had served her well, but she had also learned to hide those capabilities to avoid uncomfortable questions. "I want to earn my place here the same way everyone else does," Sarah said finally. "I don't want special consideration based on previous training that most people don't even know existed." Chief Randall smiled for the first time since she had known him. That's exactly what I hoped you would say. But I also want you to know that your performance throughout this training has been exceptional by any standard. You've earned the respect of your teammates and instructors through your own efforts." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "There's something else you should know. The tattoo on your shoulder blade doesn't just represent completion of Project Nightingale. Those 13 stars represent the women who didn't make it through the program, including 3 who died during training accidents that were covered up for political reasons." Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes as she thought about the women who had started that program with her but hadn't survived to see its completion. The tattoo had always been a reminder of what she had accomplished, but also of the price that had been paid by others who had shared her dreams. "I know about the real meaning of that tattoo because I helped design it," Chief Randall continued. "And I know that every woman who graduated from that program promised to carry forward the memory of those who didn't. You've been doing that throughout this training, whether you realized it or not." The conversation continued for another hour as Chief Randall shared details about what had happened to the other graduates of Project Nightingale and how their classified training had been integrated into their subsequent military careers. Sarah learned that she wasn't the only one who had attempted SEAL training, but she was the first to make it as far as Hell Week. When she finally returned to the barracks, her teammates were sleeping deeply for the first time in 5 days. Sarah lay on her bunk, staring at the ceiling and processing everything she had learned. Her secret was no longer secret, but rather than feeling exposed, she felt a strange sense of relief. For years, she had carried the burden of hiding her true capabilities and background. Now, at least with Chief Randall, she could be honest about the experiences that had shaped her into the person she was today. The path forward would still be challenging, but she no longer had to walk it alone. The next morning, as the surviving members of her class began the advanced phases of SEAL training, Sarah noticed a change in how Chief Randall interacted with her. There was a subtle acknowledgement of shared experience and mutual respect that hadn't been there before. Morrison, Thompson, Jackson, and the other surviving recruits continued to view her as the capable teammate she had proven herself to be throughout training. But now Sarah understood that her journey to this point had been even more complex than any of them realized. As they moved through the final months of training, learning advanced diving techniques, weapon systems, and small unit tactics, Sarah carried with her the knowledge that she was representing not just herself, but also the memory of women who had died pursuing similar dreams. The tattoo on her shoulder blade remained hidden beneath her uniform, but its significance had been acknowledged by the one person who truly understood what it meant. When graduation day finally arrived, Sarah stood with the 8 other survivors of her original class as they received their SEAL tridents. Chief Randall personally pinned the insignia to her uniform, and as he did so, he spoke quietly so that only she could hear. 13 women started Project Nightingale, and only 5 graduated. Of those 5, you're the first to earn this, he said, indicating the trident. Wear it with the honor it deserves, and remember that you're carrying forward something larger than yourself. Sarah nodded, understanding that her journey was complete, but also just beginning. She had proven that determination, skill, and character mattered more than physical size or gender. But more importantly, she had honored the memory of women who had dreamed of opportunities like this, but hadn't lived to see them realized. As the ceremony concluded and the new SEALs prepared for their first operational assignments, Sarah reflected on the path that had brought her to this moment. From a burning apartment building where she had saved her brother, through Marines reconnaissance training, through a classified program that officially didn't exist, to Hell Week and beyond. The laughter and doubts of those early days in training seemed like ancient history now. She had silenced her critics not through confrontation or argument, but through consistent performance and unwavering determination. The recognition in Chief Randall's eyes when he had finally seen her tattoo had been worth years of careful secrecy. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as she joined the operational teams where her real work would begin. But tonight, Sarah Martinez stood as living proof that barriers existed primarily in the minds of those who accepted them, and that the only limitations that truly mattered were the ones people placed on themselves.